Welcome to Marple Parlor, where we dive into the timeless mysteries of Agatha Christie with a touch of warmth and intrigue. I'm Maddox Hale, your host, and today we're embarking on a brand new tale crafted in the style of the Queen of Crime herself. Settle in with a cup of tea, perhaps by a cozy fire, as we unravel the poisoned bride of Crimson Orchard, a Miss Marple killer case. This is a long, relaxing journey, over 90 minutes of narration, so make yourself comfortable. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more Marple magic. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from: London, a quiet village, or somewhere exotic. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Introduction and Setup. In the spring of 1925, when the world was still healing from the scars of the Great War, the rolling hills of Kent cradled a place of timeless beauty known as Crimson Orchard. This grand estate, a jewel of Victorian architecture, stood proudly amidst acres of apple trees that blushed crimson under the April sun, their branches heavy with the promise of harvest. The manor itself was a study in contrasts. Its red brick walls, cloaked in ivy that whispered of forgotten summers, exuded warmth. Yet the tall, mullioned windows seemed to guard secrets as old as the oaks that lined the drive. Crimson Orchard was more than a house. It was a living tapestry of the Hargrove family's triumphs and tragedies, its orchard stretching like a protective embrace around the heart of the estate. The occasion drawing all eyes to this idyllic corner of England was nothing less than the wedding of the season. Lady Eleanor Hargrove, the only child of Sir Reginald Hargrove, was to marry Captain Victor Langford in a ceremony that promised to rival the grandeur of a royal affair. Eleanor, at 25, was a vision of elegance. Her raven hair swept into intricate waves, her emerald eyes sparkling with a vitality that captivated every room. Her porcelain skin seemed to glow in the soft light of the chandeliers, and her laughter, like the chime of a silver bell, echoed through the hall. Decorated with the Victoria Cross, he bore the marks of his service, a slight limp from a shrapnel wound, and a brooding intensity that made women sigh and men wary. His family, once landed gentry, had fallen on hard times, and whispers in London's drawing rooms suggested his engagement to Eleanor was as much a financial salvation as a romantic conquest. Victor's charm was undeniable, but his late-night walks in the orchards, pipe smoke trailing behind him, hinted at private burdens he shared with no one. The guest list was a carefully curated ensemble, each figure bringing their own complexities to the gathering. Amelia Hargrove, Eleanor's cousin, was a spinster of 40 with a sharp tongue and sharper mind. As the estate's bookkeeper, she wielded her ledgers like a general, her hawk-like eyes missing no discrepancy. Amelia's devotion to the Hargrove legacy was absolute, but her pinched expression and curt replies to Eleanor's exuberance suggested a resentment that simmered like a kettle left too long on the stove. Some said she envied Eleanor's youth and freedom, others that she guarded the family fortune with a zeal bordering on obsession. Dr. Elias Thorne, the family physician, was another fixture at Crimson Orchard. A scholarly man in his late 40s, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a penchant for collecting rare poisons from his travels in the Orient, he was both friend and confidant to Sir Reginald. His fascination with toxicology was an open secret. He kept a locked cabinet in his study filled with vials of curious substances, each labeled with meticulous care. Dr. Thorne often wandered the orchards, notebook in hand, sketching exotic plants or murmuring about their medicinal properties. His quiet demeanor belied a restless intellect, and his presence at the wedding seemed as much professional as personal. Lydia Beaumont, Eleanor's closest friend and bridesmaid, brought a touch of London's West End to the countryside. At 28, she was a rising actress, known for her vivacious performances and a smile that could charm a statue. Her golden curls and quick wit made her the center of any gathering, but rumors swirled of a past dalliance with Victor before his engagement unmatched. Lastly, there was Reverend Silas Crowe, the local vicar tasked with officiating the ceremony. A man in his 50s, with a gaunt face and eyes that burned with righteous fervor. He preached against the excesses of the modern age, jazz, flappers, and what he called the poison of vanity. His disapproval of Eleanor's lavish lifestyle was thinly veiled, and his sermons, delivered in the estate's small chapel, carried a weight that made even the boldest guests squirm. Yet, his presence lent a moral gravity to the proceedings, as if to remind all that divine judgment watched over Crimson Orchard. As the wedding eve approached, the manor buzzed with anticipation. Maids polished crystal, footmen arranged tables laden with delicacies, and the scent of apple blossoms drifted through open windows. Eleanor retired early to her bridal suite on the second floor, a sumptuous room with French windows overlooking the orchards. The suite was her sanctuary, locked from the inside for privacy, its walls adorned with delicate wallpaper and a 4-poster bed draped in white lace. On her vanity lay her wedding gown, a cascade of silk that shimmered like moonlight, and beside it, a small vial of perfume, a gift from an anonymous admirer, its crystal facets catching the lamplight. Eleanor sipped champagne, her reflection in the mirror serene yet pensive, as if she sensed the shadows gathering beyond the locked door. Among the guests was an unexpected but welcome figure, Miss Jane Marple, a distant cousin of Sir Reginald from the village of St. Mary Mead. An elderly spinster with snowy hair and a gentle smile, she seemed an unassuming addition to the party, her knitting needles clicking softly as she sat in a corner of the drawing room. Yet, her mild eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. The fleeting glance between Victor and Lydia, the tightening of Amelia's lips when Eleanor spoke, the way Dr. Thorne's fingers lingered on his notebook. Miss Marple had a knack for noticing the little things, the threads of human nature that others overlooked. People are much the same, whether in a village or a grand estate, she remarked to a passing air tonight, she murmured, though the room was warm. A chill that speaks of secrets. The stage was set, the players assembled, and Crimson Orchard held its breath, waiting for the curtain to rise on a tragedy no one yet suspected. Chapter 2. The Crime Discovered. The morning of the wedding broke over Crimson Orchard with a deceptive serenity, as if the world itself conspired to mask the tragedy waiting in the wings. The sun rose in a sky of pale gold, casting long shadows through the apple trees, their crimson fruits glistening with dew like jewels scattered on velvet. Birds trilled in the branches, their songs weaving through the crisp air, while the scent of fresh-baked scones and brewing tea drifted from the manor's kitchens. Maids bustled through the halls, their aprons starched to perfection, arranging trays of delicate pastries and polishing crystal flutes for the champagne toasts to come. In the great hall, garlands of white roses and crimson apples hung in elegant loops, a testament to Sir Reginald Hargrove's determination that his daughter Eleanor's wedding would be nothing short of spectacular. Sir Reginald himself paced the parquet floor, his portly frame clad in a morning suit, his mustache twitching with nervous energy as he muttered about the placement of chairs and the timing of the string quartet. Guests stirred in their rooms, their footsteps soft on the thick carpets, while footmen carried silver trays to bedchambers, offering tea and gossip in equal measure. The manor hummed with anticipation, the air thick with the promise of joy. Yet beneath it all, a silent current of unease rippled, unnoticed by all but the keenest observer. At precisely 9 o'clock, the tranquility shattered. A scream, sharp and piercing as a shard of glass, tore through the house, echoing from the second floor where the bridal suite lay. It was Lydia Beaumont, Eleanor's vivacious friend and bridesmaid, whose cry brought the household to a halt. Maids froze mid-task, their trays clattering. Sir Reginald's head snapped up, his face paling, and even the birds outside seemed to hush. Lydia stood before the heavy oak door of the bridal suite, with a splintering crack. The room revealed was a tableau of beauty, turned to horror. The bridal suite, with its French windows overlooking the orchards and its walls papered in soft rose patterns, was bathed in morning light. Eleanor's wedding gown lay across the four-poster bed, a cascade of silk shimmering like a frozen waterfall. But the bride herself was no longer a vision of radiance. Eleanor Hargrove lay crumpled on the Persian rug beside her vanity, her raven hair splayed like ink spilled across a page. Her face, once luminous, was contorted in a grimace of agony, her lips tinged an unnatural blue, and a faint froth lingered at the corners of her mouth. In her hand, clutched with a rigor that spoke of her final moments, was a crystal vial. Her perfume, a gift from an anonymous admirer, half empty and glinting cruelly in the sunlight. Dr. Elias Thorne, the family physician, pushed through the crowd, his wire-rimmed spectacles glinting as he knelt beside the body. His fingers, steady despite the gasps around him, sought a pulse at her wrist, then her neck. His face grew grave and he leaned closer to the vial, sniffing cautiously. "Cyanide," he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of certainty. "A lethal dose, administered recently. She's been dead no more than an hour." He rose, adjusting his spectacles, his scholarly demeanor unshaken, but his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. This was no accident. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Sir Reginald staggered, clutching the doorframe, his ruddy face ashen. "My darling girl," he whispered, tears welling. "Who would do this to my Eleanor?" He sank into a chair, head in hands, as the maids hovered, unsure whether to comfort or flee. Captain Victor Langford, the groom who should have been exchanging vows by noon, stood frozen at the threshold, his dark eyes fixed on Eleanor's body. His limp seemed more pronounced, his cane trembling in his grip. "The wages of sin," he intoned, his voice steady but his fingers whitening around the leather cover. "We must pray for her soul." His piety felt like a shield, deflecting questions no one had yet dared to ask. The room itself was a puzzle, sealed as tightly as a tomb. The French windows, latched from within, showed no signs of tampering, their panes intact and the drop below too sheer for entry. The door's bolt, now broken, had been secure when Lydia arrived, and the key hung undisturbed on a hook inside the room. No footprints marred the polished floor save for those of the intruders, and the vanity, laden with powders, combs, and the fateful vial, bore no signs of a struggle. How had the poison reached Eleanor? The vial was hers, a gift delivered days earlier, but who could have tampered with it? And when? The local constable, Inspector Craddock, arrived within the hour. A stout man with a penchant for stating the obvious. "Impossible," he declared, scratching his head as he surveyed the locked room. "No one could have got in or out without being seen. This is a proper mystery." His men cordoned off the suite, covering Eleanor's body with a sheet, though the image of her anguished face lingered in every mind. Craddock began questioning the staff, his notebook filling with hasty scribbles, but his confusion was palpable. Miss Jane Marple, the elderly spinster from St. Mary Mead, had joined the gathering in the drawing room downstairs, her knitting needles clicking softly as she observed the chaos. Invited as a distant cousin of Sir Reginald, she seemed an unassuming figure, her snowy hair tucked beneath a lace cap, her mild eyes taking in every detail. "Human nature is much the same everywhere," she remarked to a hovering maid, her voice gentle but laced with quiet authority. "And poison, you know, is often a choice of calculation or passion." As the morning wore on, whispers of motives began to surface, like bubbles rising in a still pond. Victor stood to inherit a substantial sum through a prenuptial agreement. Beware the crimson gift, its handwriting unfamiliar and smudged, as if written in haste. The vial's label bore a faint scratch, perhaps from tampering, though no fingerprint stood out. And in the orchards, a gardener's boy reported seeing a shadowy figure the previous night, cloaked in darkness, moving toward the house. The household descended into a tense hush, the wedding's joy replaced by suspicion. Guests eyed each other over cold tea, their conversations stilted, their glances sharp. Miss Marple, knitting quietly, noted the tightening of Victor's jaw, the way Lydia's tears paused when no one watched, the flicker of unease in Dr. Thorne's eyes. "It's the little things," she murmured, her needles pausing. "The little things that tell the tale." Chapter 3. Investigation begins. The sun had climbed higher over Crimson Orchard, its golden rays filtering through the crimson-laden apple trees, but the warmth did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the manor. The great hall, once alive with wedding preparations, now stood somber, its garlands of roses and apples wilting as if mourning the loss of Lady Eleanor Hargrove. The bridal suite, where her body had been found just hours earlier, was sealed off, a constable stationed at the door, his young face pale but resolute. Below, in the drawing room, guests and staff moved like shadows, their voices hushed, their eyes darting with suspicion. The air was thick with unspoken questions, and the scent of tragedy lingered like the faint tang of cyanide. Inspector Craddock, the local constable, had taken charge, with the earnestness of a man determined to prove himself, though his methods leaned heavily on routine. A stout figure with a ruddy complexion and a notebook clutched like a talisman, he set up his makeshift headquarters in the manor's library, a grand room lined with leather-bound tomes and heavy with the aroma of old paper and pipe smoke. His approach was methodical but uninspired, his questions blunt as he scribbled notes with a pencil that seemed perpetually in need of sharpening. "We'll get to the bottom of this," but laced with quiet curiosity. And yet it's what they don't say that often matters most. Craddock began his interviews with the key suspects, summoning them one by one to the library. The first was Captain Victor Langford, the bereaved groom, whose war hero status did little to shield him from scrutiny. He entered with a measured step, his cane tapping the floor, his face pale but composed. "I loved Eleanor," he said, his voice low, cracking slightly on her name. "We argued last night, yes. About money, I'll admit. She worried I was marrying her for the Hargrove fortune, but it wasn't true." He claimed to have left her suite at midnight, the door bolted behind him as Eleanor insisted on privacy. His alibi for the hours before her death? Alone in his study reading a volume of Tennyson, with no one to corroborate. Craddock scribbled furiously, but Miss Marple noted the way Victor's fingers tightened on his cane, as if anchoring himself against a storm. Next came Amelia Hargrove, Eleanor's cousin and the estate's bookkeeper. Her severe black dress and pinched expression gave her the air of a governess, though her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Eleanor was spoiled, I won't deny it," she said, her tone clipped. "But kill her? Preposterous. Her death complicates the estate's finances dreadfully. She claimed to have been asleep in her room after a late night balancing ledgers, though the maids reported hearing footsteps in her corridor past midnight." Amelia's hands, clasped tightly, betrayed a tremor when Craddock mentioned the vial of perfume. Miss Marple's needles paused briefly, her gaze lingering on Amelia's rigid posture. Lydia Beaumont, the actress and bridesmaid, swept into the library with the flair of a stage star, her golden curls slightly askew, her eyes red from crying, or so she claimed. "Eleanor and I were like sisters," she insisted, dabbing at her face with a lace handkerchief. "Yes, Victor and I had a history, but that was long over. I was thrilled for them." Her alibi was vague, chatting with maids in the servants' hall until nearly 1 and more nervous. Harold Fitch, the gardener, shuffled in, his soil-stained hands twisting his cap. "That girl trampled my prize apples once," he grumbled. "But kill her? I ain't that sort." He claimed to have been in his potting shed, tending to late-night chores, though no one could confirm his presence. His scowl deepened when Craddock mentioned the muddy footprint beneath Eleanor's window, and Miss Marple observed how his eyes darted to the floor, as if tracing paths only he knew. Reverend Silas Crowe, the vicar, was the last to be questioned, his gaunt face solemn as he clutched his Bible. "Sin begets sin," he said, his voice resonant with pulpit authority. "I warned Eleanor of vanity, of the dangers of worldly excess. But murder? I am a man of God." He claimed to have spent the night in the estate's chapel, praying for the wedding's success, though the chapel was empty when a footman passed at midnight. Miss Marple's lips twitched slightly, noting the way his fingers gripped the Bible's edges as if it were a shield. As the interviews concluded, Craddock's frustration was palpable. "No clear alibis, no clear entry to that locked room," he muttered, flipping through his notebook. But clues were beginning to surface, delicate as the first blossoms of spring. Miss Marple, strolling the grounds after lunch, noticed the muddy footprint beneath the suite's window, its edges crisp despite the dry morning. It seemed out of place, given the sheer drop below, but suggestive of someone's presence. In the potting shed she found a ring of keys hanging on a nail, one missing, according to Harold's grumbling. The cryptic note in Eleanor's vanity, "Beware the crimson gift," was penned in ink that matched a bottle in the library, though the handwriting eluded identification. And the perfume vial's label, when examined closely, bore a faint smudge, as if a fingerprint had been hastily wiped away. The manor grew oppressive as the day wore on, rain clouds gathering to patter against the windows like accusing fingers. Over a strained lunch, suspects avoided each other's gazes, their conversations clipped truth. As evening approached, the household braced for what lay ahead. Craddock planned to search the suspects' rooms, but Miss Marple sensed the answers lay not in grand gestures but in the quiet details. The glance, the hesitation, the misplaced key. "Human nature is a curious thing," she said softly, resuming her knitting. "And it's never so curious as when it's hiding something." Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. The afternoon sun hung low over Crimson Orchard, casting long dappled shadows through the apple trees, their crimson fruits glowing like embers against the fading light. Inside the manor, the air was heavy with suspicion, the once festive halls now cloaked in a somber hush. The bridal suite remained sealed, a silent testament to Eleanor Hargrove's untimely death, while the household moved through its routines like actors in a play gone tragically awry. Maids whispered in corners, their dusters idle. Footmen carried trays with mechanical precision, and the guests, once eager for celebration, now avoided each other's eyes, their voices clipped and guarded. The scent of rain lingered outside, mingling with the faint sweetness of apples, as if the orchard itself mourned the loss of its lady. Inspector Craddock, undeterred by the locked room puzzle, pressed forward with his investigation, his notebook now a tattered companion filled with scribbled theories and crossed-out names. His men had begun searching the manor, their boots echoing on the polished floors, but the answers remained elusive. "It's a devil of a case," he muttered to a constable, his pencil snapping in frustration. Clues everywhere, but none that fit. Yet, to Miss Jane Marple, seated quietly in the drawing room with her knitting, the clues were like scattered petals, some true, others plucked to mislead. Her needles clicked softly, a rhythmic counterpoint to the chaos, her mild eyes scanning the room with the precision of a watchmaker. "It's curious," she remarked to a passing maid, "how the truth often hides behind the things we're meant to see." The investigation deepened as new evidence surfaced. Each discovery a potential key was a torn letter, its edges singed, as if someone had tried to burn it. The fragment read, "Pay, or your affair with V is revealed." Lydia, her theatrical composure faltering, claimed it was from an old suitor in London, a relic of her West End days. "Utter nonsense," she said, tossing her golden curls. "Someone's trying to make trouble." But her eyes darted to Victor Langford, who stood nearby, his face unreadable. Craddock seized the letter, suspecting blackmail. But Miss Marple wondered if Lydia herself had penned it. A false trail to deflect suspicion. The handwriting, looping and elegant, bore a faint resemblance to notes found in the manor's guest book, though no match was certain. Victor, too, faced scrutiny when a groundskeeper found his Victoria Cross medal, its ribbon frayed, near the path beneath Eleanor's window. "I lost it days ago," he insisted, his voice tight. "Must have dropped it during our argument." But the medal's placement, so close to the muddy footprint, raised questions. Had he been outside the suite that night, despite his alibi of reading alone? His limp, Miss Marple observed, seemed less pronounced when he thought no one was watching, a detail that piqued her curiosity. "Grief can make one forgetful," she murmured, her needles pausing. "But so can guilt." Dr. Thorne's poison collection, housed in a locked cabinet in his study, yielded another troubling find. A vial of cyanide was missing, its locked in the velvet-lined case conspicuously empty. "It was there last week," Thorne said, his scholarly calm fraying. "Someone must have taken it. I keep the key on me always." Yet, a maid recalled seeing him leave his study unlocked during a late-night billiards game with Sir Reginald. Thorne's fingers brushed his notebook nervously, and Miss Marple noted a faint ink stain on his cuff, matching the bottle in the library where the cryptic note was penned. Amelia Hargrove, ever the meticulous bookkeeper, was not spared. A search of her room uncovered a ledger with Curie's shadow over his prayers the night before. Miss Marple noted the tremor in his voice, as if his piety masked a deeper agitation. The locked room itself remained the greatest enigma. Craddock's men examined the bolt, an old iron mechanism that showed faint scratches, suggesting it might have been jimmied from outside, with a thin wire through the keyhole. A classic trick, but no wire was found. The French windows, latched securely, bore no marks of forced entry, and the sheer drop below ruled out climbing. Yet a faint smudge on the window pane caught Miss Marple's eye, as if a cloth had wiped away evidence. "Curious," she said softly, her knitting needle still. "Someone took great care to leave no trace." As evening descended, the manor's atmosphere grew taut, like a bowstring ready to snap. At dinner, the suspects sat around the long oak table, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight. Victor pushed his food absently, his eyes distant. Lydia's laughter rang hollow, drawing a scowl from Amelia. Dr. Thorne sipped his wine with forced calm. Harold muttered about neglected trees, and Reverend Crowe bowed his head, his prayer sounding more like an accusation. Sir Reginald, still cloaked in grief, dined in his study, leaving the others to their uneasy truce. Miss Marple, declining the meal, took another turn through the orchards, her sensible shoes crunching on fallen apples. She noticed a hidden path, overgrown but recently trodden, leading from the potting shed to the manor's west wing. A groundskeeper's boy, shyly offering information, mentioned seeing Lydia in the orchards the previous night, claiming she was stargazing. Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Stars are lovely," she said, "but they don't always light the truth." Clues and red herrings tangled like the orchard's roots. The poisoned apple pointed to Harold, but was it too obvious? Lydia's letter suggested blackmail, but was it her own creation? Victor's medal, Thorne's missing vial, Amelia's ledger, Crowe's sermon. All pieces of a puzzle. Some inside, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The once grand halls now a stage for whispered accusations and guarded glances. The tragedy of Eleanor Hargrove's death, poisoned in her locked bridal suite, had cast a pall over the household, and each passing hour tightened the web of suspicion. Maids moved silently, their eyes averted. Footmen lingered at doorways, eavesdropping, and the guests, once bound by celebration, now circled each other like wary cats. The rain, which had begun as a soft patter, now drummed steadily against the windows, a relentless reminder that time was pressing. Inspector Craddock, his ruddy face etched with frustration, paced the library, his notebook a jumble of half-formed theories. The locked room mystery, Eleanor's death by cyanide with no clear entry or exit, defied his plodding logic. "It's as if the devil himself slipped in," he muttered to a constable, who nodded without conviction. Yet, new complications arose, tangling the investigation like ivy. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her usual corner of the drawing room, her knitting needles clicking with metronomic calm, observed the unfolding drama with her mild, piercing gaze. "Complications are like ripples in a pond," she said softly to a hovering maid. "They spread, but they always start somewhere." The first shock came at tea time, when Sir Reginald Hargrove, still reeling from his daughter's death, clutched his throat after sipping his Darjeeling. The cup clattered to the floor, its contents spilling across the Persian rug, and he gasped, his face flushed. "Poison," he croaked, before spitting out the liquid, his eyes wild. Dr. Elias Thorne, ever the physician, rushed to his side, sniffing the spilled tea. "Cyanide again," he confirmed, his voice tight. "A trace amount. Non-lethal, thankfully." The room erupted in gasps, guests leaping from their seats. Sir Reginald, trembling but unharmed, was escorted to his study, where he collapsed into an armchair, muttering about curses. The tea had come from the kitchen. Claim of reading Tennyson. A startling twist came from the coroner's report delivered by a breathless messenger. Eleanor's autopsy revealed not just the fatal dose of cyanide from the perfume vial, but traces of a slower-acting poison in her system, administered over days, perhaps weeks. The symptoms, fatigue, nausea, had been dismissed as wedding nerves, but now they pointed to a calculated plan. The slow poison, a rare alkaloid, required access to Eleanor's food or drink, implicating someone close. Miss Marple's needles paused as she pondered. Who had such intimate access? The kitchen staff? A trusted friend? Or someone in the family? Lydia Beaumont, under renewed scrutiny, cracked under Craddock's questioning. Sobbing in the library, she confessed to her affair with Victor. Not just a fleeting romance, but a passionate entanglement that ended only when Eleanor's engagement was announced. "I loved him," she admitted, her golden curls trembling. "But I swear, I didn't kill her." Her confession stirred the pot, as servants recalled her lingering near Eleanor's tea tray the previous week. Yet, a new twist emerged. Eleanor had been pregnant, the coroner revealed. But the child was not Victor's. A scandal that sent shockwaves through the manor. Victor's face drained of color when confronted. "I didn't know," he whispered, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of something darker. Shame? Or fear? Amelia Hargrove faced her own reckoning. Pressed about her ledger discrepancies, she admitted to siphoning funds. Not for Eleanor, but to support a secret lover. A mysterious figure in London, she claimed, refusing to name him. Dr. Thorne, questioned separately, denied any romantic involvement, though a maid reported seeing them whispering in the orchards days before. Purely professional, Thorne insisted, but his ink-stained fingers fidgeted, and Miss Marple noted a letter in his pocket, its seal matching Amelia's stationery. Harold Fitch, the gardener, was caught with a vial in his shed, hidden behind a sack of fertilizer. "It's plant food," he bellowed with more than scripture. The greatest twist came from the orchards themselves. Miss Marple, braving the rain, discovered a hidden tunnel beneath a gnarled apple tree, its entrance concealed by roots. Used in smuggling days, it led from the orchards to the manor's cellar, perilously close to the west wing, near Eleanor's suite. The tunnel was dusty, unused for years, but a fresh cigarette stub, bearing Victor's preferred brand, lay at its mouth. Had someone accessed the suite this way? Yet, the room's bolt remained locked from within, deepening the mystery. Curiouser and curiouser, Miss Marple murmured, her shawl damp but her resolve firm. Tensions erupted at dinner, where accusations flew like sparks. Lydia pointed at Amelia, claiming her ledger proved greed. Amelia snapped that Lydia's tears were crocodile tears. Victor accused Harold of tampering with the apples. And Thorne, usually composed, raised his voice when Crow hinted at sins of the flesh. Sir Reginald, emerging briefly, demanded justice, his voice breaking. Craddock, overwhelmed, arrested Harold on circumstantial evidence. The poisoned apple, the missing key. But Miss Marple shook her head. "The truth is like an orchard," she said softly. "You must dig beneath the surface." As night fell, the manor felt like a pressure cooker, its inhabitants on edge. Miss Marple, knitting by the fire, pieced together the threads. The slow poison, the second attempt on Sir Reginald, the tunnel, the cigarette stub. Each suspect's alibi cracked under scrutiny. Their motives, jealousy, greed, revenge, intertwining like the orchard's roots. "Human nature is a tangle," she murmured, her needles clicking. "But every tangle has a thread to pull." Chapter 6. The Revelation. The rain had ceased over Crimson Orchard, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and apples, as if Inspector Craddock, his notebook dog-eared and his patience worn thin, deferred to her with a reluctant nod. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff, "you've been observing closely. If you've something to say, let's hear it." The room stilled, all eyes turning to the elderly lady who seemed, at first glance, an unlikely arbiter of truth. "It's clear now," Miss Marple began, her voice soft but carrying a quiet authority, like a village gossip revealing a long-held secret. "The murderer is among us, driven by a motive as old as time. Jealousy, twisted with greed, and executed with a cunning that almost defied detection. But the truth, you see, is like a thread in a tapestry. Pull it gently, and the whole pattern unravels." She turned her gaze to the suspects, her eyes lingering on each in turn. "Let us begin with the crime itself. Eleanor Hargrove, poisoned in her locked bridal suite by cyanide in a perfume vial, with traces of a slower poison in her system. The room was bolted, the windows latched, the key untouched. How was it done? And by whom? The clues, though tangled with deception, point to one person." Miss Marple paused, letting the silence settle, her fingers brushing the edge of her shawl. The perfume vial. A gift labeled anonymous was the fatal instrument. But it was tampered with by someone who knew Eleanor's habits intimately. The slow poison, an alkaloid administered over days, required access to her food or drink. The second attempt on Sir Reginald's tea confirmed the killer's audacity, using the same cyanide source. These acts were not impulsive but meticulously planned. She turned to Lydia Beaumont, whose handkerchief trembled in her hands. "Miss Beaumont, You loved Victor Langford, didn't you? Not as a passing fancy, but with a passion that burned even after his engagement to Eleanor. Missing vial was no coincidence. And you, Miss Beaumont, used your theatrical skills to mask the cyanide's faint residue on your hands, covering it with makeup powder. Miss Marple's voice softened, almost pitying. You were in the orchards that night, not stargazing, but ensuring the vial was ready, pacing near the west wing where the tunnel lies, unused but a distraction you hoped we'd chase. She turned to the other clues, unraveling the red herrings. The poisoned apple in Eleanor's room, pointing to Harold Fitch, was a clever misdirection. You took it from his shed, Miss Beaumont, knowing his grudge would make him a suspect. The muddy footprint beneath the window? A groundskeeper's, unrelated. But you encouraged the boy to mention a shadow to muddy the waters. The torn letter in your jewelry box, hinting at blackmail, was written by you. A false trail to suggest someone else threatened you. And Victor's medal, found near the path, dropped innocently during his argument with Eleanor, though you hoped it would implicate him. Victor's face flushed, his cane tapping. I loved her, he said hoarsely. I'd never. I believe you, Miss Marple interjected gently. Your grief is genuine, though your secrecy about Eleanor's pregnancy, by another man, added confusion. You suspected, didn't you? But you kept silent, hoping to protect her honor. She addressed Amelia's ledger discrepancies. Miss Hargrove, your siphoned funds were for a charitable cause, not a lover. A secret you guarded to avoid Sir Reginald's disapproval. Your resentment of Eleanor was real, but not murderous. To Dr. Thorne, your fascination with poisons was a distraction, though your carelessness enabled the theft. To Harold, your anger was loud, but your heart is not that of a killer. To Reverend Crowe, your past fraud and stern sermons clouded your name, but you sought only to warn. To him, and you. Lydia collapsed, sobbing. She took everything from me, she gasped. Victor was mine first. Her confession spilled like a dam breaking, detailing how she'd planned the slow poison, stolen the cyanide, and orchestrated the locked room murder to deflect suspicion. Craddock, stunned, signaled his constable to restrain her, though her tears rendered her harmless. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her voice soft. Human nature is a curious thing. Love and hate are such close neighbors, aren't they? She looked to Sir Reginald, whose face was a mask of sorrow and relief. Justice will come, Sir Reginald, but it cannot undo the loss. The room dispersed in hushed shock, Lydia's sobs echoing as she was led away. The truth, like the orchard's apples, had ripened at last, revealing a heart poisoned by envy. Miss Marple's needles clicked on, weaving the final threads of the tale. Chapter 7. Justice Served. The morning after Lydia Beaumont's confession dawned over Crimson Orchard with a quiet clarity, as if the manor itself exhaled after days of holding its breath. The rain had cleared, leaving the apple trees sparkling under a tentative sun, their crimson fruits glistening like jewels reclaimed from shadow. Inside the great house, the air was no longer thick with suspicion, but heavy with a somber relief. the kind that follows truth's unveiling, but cannot erase its cost. The garlands of white roses and apples, prepared for a wedding that never came, had been quietly removed, and the halls, once alive with anticipation, now echoed with the soft footsteps of a household in mourning. Yet, there was a sense of resolution, a knot untied, as justice prepared to take its course. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing room, her knitting needles clicking softly, a gentle rhythm that seemed to soothe the room's lingering unease. Her snowy hair caught the morning light, and her mild eyes, ever observant, surveyed the gathered figures with a compassion tempered by wisdom. Inspector Craddock, his notebook finally at rest, stood by the fireplace, his ruddy face softened by the case's resolution. The room absorbed his words in silence, the finality settling like dust. Lydia, confined to a guest room under guard, had spent the night in tearful remorse, her theatrical facade stripped away. Her fate was sealed, the law's machinery already in motion, with a trial looming in London's courts. The charge of murder, Craddock noted, carried a heavy penalty, and the second attempt on Sir Reginald ensured a thorough reckoning. Miss Marple, setting her knitting aside, spoke softly, her voice carrying the warmth of a village hearth. "Justice is a curious thing," she said, her eyes meeting Sir Reginald's. "It cannot restore what's lost, but it can bring a measure of peace." Lydia's heart was poisoned long before she turned to cyanide, by envy, by love turned bitter. "Such things I've seen in my village are not so rare." Sir Reginald nodded, his mustache trembling, though he said nothing, his fingers clutching the locket as if it anchored him to his daughter. The aftermath of the revelation rippled through the household, each figure grappling with their role in the tragedy. Victor Langford, cleared of suspicion, faced a different judgment, his own. The revelation of Eleanor's pregnancy, not his child, had shattered his image of their love, yet he bore no malice. "I thought I knew her," he said quietly to Miss Marple, his voice raw. "But I loved her still." His plans were uncertain. Whispers among the staff suggested he would leave for the colonies, seeking a fresh start far from Crimson Orchard's memories. His limp, Miss Marple noted, was genuine now, weighted by grief rather than pretense. "You're a good man, Captain," she said gently. "The heart heals given time." Amelia Hargrove, her ledger discrepancies explained as charitable donations to a London orphanage, emerged as the estate's new steward. Sir Reginald, too broken to manage affairs, entrusted her with Crimson Orchard's future. "Eleanor would have wanted it," Amelia said, her voice softer than before, her resentment replaced by duty. Miss Marple observed the change, noting how adversity often revealed strength. "You'll do well." "Lie," he muttered to Miss Marple as she passed his shed. "People do." She nodded, noting the fresh key on his ring, replacing the one stolen. "Tend your trees, Mr. Fitch," she said. "They'll outlast us all." Reverend Silas Crowe, his past fraud exposed but irrelevant to the crime, offered a sermon in the chapel that evening, his words gentler than before. "We are all sinners," he said, his gaunt face softened by humility. "But redemption is possible." His congregation, small but attentive, included the manor's staff, who found solace in his message. Miss Marple, attending out of courtesy, noted his clasped hands, no longer trembling. "Faith can be a comfort," she murmured, "when it's honest." The locked room mystery, now solved, lingered in the household's collective memory. Lydia's duplicate key, crafted from an impression during a fitting, had unlocked the sweet, allowing her to tamper with the vial and exit unnoticed. The slow poison, administered via sugar lumps, had weakened Eleanor, making the cyanide's final dose lethal. The attempt on Sir Reginald, a desperate bid to cover her tracks, had been her undoing, the cyanide traced to the same stolen vial. Miss Marple's deductions, based on Lydia's orchard wanderings, her access to Eleanor, and the smudged vial, had woven the threads into a coherent truth. As the day drew to a close, the manor began to heal, its wounds still raw but no longer festering. Sir Reginald, bolstered by Miss Marple's quiet counsel, spoke of planting a memorial tree for Eleanor, its roots to mingle with the orchard's ancient ones. "She loved the apples," he said, his voice breaking. "They'll carry her memory." The guests prepared to depart, their bags packed, their farewells subdued. Victor left a single white rose on Eleanor's vanity, a silent goodbye. Amelia sorted her ledgers with newfound purpose. Thorne packed his notebooks, Harold tended his trees, and Crow prayed for peace. Miss Marple, her knitting bag tucked up, a measure of its former serenity. The apple trees, heavy with crimson fruit, swayed gently in a warm breeze, their branches whispering of renewal rather than secrets. The manor's red brick facade, once a silent witness to betrayal and loss, glowed under the August sun, its ivy-clad walls softened by time's gentle hand. The great hall, stripped of its mournful garlands, now hosted quieter gatherings, tea parties for local gentry, charity luncheons, and the occasional laughter of children from the nearby village. Yet the memory of that fateful spring lingered, like the faint scent of apples that clung to the air, a reminder that even the loveliest places hold echoes of sorrow. Sir Reginald Hargrove, though still marked by grief, had begun to emerge from his solitude. His portly frame, once weighed down by despair, moved with a tentative purpose as he walked the orchards, his mustache no longer twitching with nervous energy, but settled in a quiet resolve. In the heart of the estate, near the oldest apple tree, he had planted a memorial sapling for Eleanor, a delicate thing with pale blossoms, its roots mingling with those of the ancient orchard. "She loved this place," he said to a visiting neighbor, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Her spirit's here, in the trees." The sapling, christened Eleanor's Grace, had become a pilgrimage point for the staff, who left small offerings of flowers or polished apples at its base, a silent tribute to the bride who never walked down the aisle. Miss Jane Marple, returned to her cottage in St. Mary Mead, had been persuaded to visit Crimson Orchard once more, invited by Sir Reginald to see the memorial and share a quiet tea. She arrived on a sunny afternoon, her sensible shoes crunching along the gravel path, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. Her snowy hair gleamed beneath a simple hat, and her mild eyes, ever observant, took in the estate's transformation. The manor, though still grand, felt lighter, as if the truth's unveiling had lifted a curse. "It's remarkable, forged in adversity." The other players in the tragedy had moved on, their paths diverging like branches from the orchard's trees. Victor Langford, cleared of suspicion but haunted by Eleanor's secrets, had left for South Africa, seeking solace in a new venture. Rumors spoke of a vineyard, a place to rebuild away from Crimson Orchard's ghosts. A letter, received by Sir Reginald, bore his elegant script, expressing gratitude and regret. "I loved her," he wrote, "but I couldn't save her." Miss Marple, reading the letter at Sir Reginald's request, saw no deceit in it, only a man grappling with love lost. "He'll find his way," she said gently. "The heart is resilient, even when broken." Dr. Elias Thorne had returned to his London practice, his poison collection dismantled and donated to a medical institute, where it could do no harm. "I've learned my lesson," he wrote in a note to the manor, his scholarly tone tempered by humility. "Curiosity must be tempered with care." Miss Marple, hearing this, smiled faintly, recalling his nervous fingers during the investigation. "Knowledge is a gift," she said to Sir Reginald, "but it needs a steady hand." Harold Fitch, the gardener, remained at Crimson Orchard, his gruff exterior softened by the estate's gratitude. The poisoned apple, a cruel misdirection, had nearly cost him his freedom, but he bore no bitterness. "Trees don't judge," he told Miss Marple as she passed his shed, his hands busy with pruning shears. "They just grow." She noted the new key ring on his belt, its missing key replaced, and the pride in his eyes as he pointed to Eleanor's grace. "Planted it myself," he said. "It'll bear fruit one day." Miss Marple nodded, her lips twitching. "You've a good heart, Mr. Fitch. It shows in your work." Reverend Silas Crowe, his past fraud a footnote in the parish records, had found a renewed calling. His sermons, once stern, now spoke of forgiveness and redemption must follow. The locked room mystery, now a tale told in hushed tones, had been laid to rest by Miss Marple's deductions. The duplicate key, the tampered vial, the slow poison, all threads woven into a tapestry of jealousy and betrayal. The red herrings, Victor's medal, the poisoned apple, Amelia's ledger, had served their purpose, distracting from Lydia's careful plan. The attempt on Sir Reginald, a desperate act, had sealed her fate, the cyanide's source unmistakable. Miss Marple, reflecting on the case, saw parallels to her village intrigues. "Human nature," she said to Sir Reginald, "is much the same, whether in a manor or a cottage. Love and hate grow close, like apples on a branch." As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple walked the orchards, her steps slow and deliberate. The memorial sapling stood proud, its blossoms a delicate promise of spring to come. She paused, her knitting bag slung over her shoulder, and touched a petal. "Eleanor would have loved this," she said softly, her eyes tracing the rows of trees. The orchard, once a place of secrets, now felt like a sanctuary, its crimson fruits a symbol of life enduring. A groundskeeper's boy, passing by, tipped his cap, his earlier tales of shadowy figures now just stories. "It's peaceful now, ma'am," he said. Miss Marple smiled. "Peace is hard won," she replied, "but it lasts." Tea concluded, Miss Marple bid farewell to Sir Reginald, promising to write. As her carriage rolled away, the manor receded, its silhouette framed against the sunset. "Secrets fade like fallen leaves," she murmured, her needles clicking once more. "But love, like an orchard, endures." Crimson Orchard, its wounds softened by time, stood ready to bloom anew, its story a chapter closed but never forgotten. Chapter 9. Untold Secrets Revealed. As autumn painted Crimson Orchard in hues of amber and gold, the estate settled into a rhythm of quiet renewal. Its crimson apple prompted a flood of recollections. And as she sat by her cottage window, her needles clicking softly, she revisited the case, her mind tracing the minor secrets that had surfaced in the months since Lydia Beaumont's confession. "Every story has its shadows," she murmured to her cat Pearl, who blinked lazily from a cushion. "And even the smallest secrets cast long shadows." In a flashback to the days following the revelation, Miss Marple recalled a quiet conversation with Harold Fitch, the gruff gardener whose bluster had masked a tender loyalty. One evening, as the manor settled after Lydia's arrest, Harold had lingered by Eleanor's grace, his weathered hands pruning its branches with care. "I never told the whole truth," he admitted to Miss Marple, his voice low. "That night, I saw Miss Beaumont in the orchards, sure. But I also saw a letter, dropped near the shed, in her handwriting. Didn't think much of it then, thought it was love nonsense. The letter," he revealed, was a draft of the blackmail note found in Lydia's jewelry box, discarded in haste. Harold, fearing trouble, had burned it, believing his silence protected the manor. Miss Marple, her eyes gentle, had nodded. "You meant well, Mr. Fitch," she said. "But truth, like your trees, grows best in the open." His confession, though minor, confirmed Lydia's cunning, crafting false clues to deflect suspicion. Another thread unraveled through a memory of Reverend Silas Crowe, whose stern piety had hidden a past of youthful folly. Weeks after the case, during a visit to St. Mary Mead's vicarage, Miss Marple learned from a colleague that Crowe's fraud conviction, a scandal of forged donations, had stemmed not from greed, but from desperation to save a failing orphanage. He was young, misguided, the colleague said, paid his debt quietly. Crowe's sermons against poisonous unions were not aimed at Eleanor alone, but at his own regrets, a warning to others drawn from personal shame. Miss Marple, sipping tea, had mused, "We all carry burdens, don't we?" His was heavier than most. This secret, irrelevant to the murder, softened criminal, explained his nervous tics, his ink-stained fingers a mark of guilt as much as scholarship. Amelia Hargrove's charitable donations, mistaken for embezzlement, revealed a deeper truth in a conversation Miss Marple recalled from her final day at the manor. Over tea, Amelia had confessed that the funds supported not just an orphanage but a child, her illegitimate niece, born to a cousin who died in disgrace. "Eleanor knew," Amelia said, her spectacles fogging briefly. "She urged me to keep it secret, to spare Father's heart." The ledger discrepancies, a red herring in the investigation, were Amelia's attempt to honor Eleanor's compassion while guarding family honor. Miss Marple, her needles pausing, had smiled. "You carried a heavy duty, Miss Hargrove. Eleanor would be proud." This secret, now shared, cemented Amelia's role as the estate's guardian, her resentment replaced by purpose. Victor Langford's untold truth surfaced through a second letter, forwarded by Sir Reginald. In South Africa, Victor had written of Eleanor's pregnancy, a secret he'd suspected but never voiced. "She confided in me," he wrote, "that the father was a London artist. A brief romance before our engagement. I forgave her, loved her still, but kept silent to protect her. His silence, mistaken for deceit, had fueled suspicion, but his departure was not flight but a quest for peace." Miss Marple, reading under her cottage's lamplight, saw no malice in his words. Love is a complicated thing, she murmured. It binds, even when it hurts. The locked room mystery, fully explained by Lydia's duplicate key and tampered vial, held one final secret, uncovered through a groundskeeper's tale. The muddy footprint beneath Eleanor's window, dismissed as a gardener's mark, belonged to a boy who'd climbed the ivy to retrieve a lost kite, unaware of the crime. His innocent act, reported late, had fueled the red herring of an outside intruder. Miss Marple, chuckling softly, recalled the boy's shy confession at the harvest festival. Chilled, sweeter than ever. Thorne, visiting briefly, spoke of his new work, free of poisons. Crow's prayers blessed the harvest, his voice warm. And Victor, though absent, was remembered in a toast to new beginnings. Miss Marple, setting the letter aside, gazed out her window at St. Mary Mead's roses. Every secret has its place, she said to Pearl, her needles clicking. But it's the truth that sets us free. The orchard story, with its layers of love, loss, and redemption, was complete. Its secrets no longer burdens but lessons, etched in the heart of Crimson Orchard. Chapter 10. A New Dawn. As winter's first frost touched Crimson Orchard, the estate stood transformed, its red brick manor glowing under a pale December sun like a beacon of resilience. The apple trees, stripped of their crimson bounty, stretched bare branches toward the sky, their stark beauty a promise of spring to come. The memorial sapling, Eleanor's grace, stood resolute in the orchard's heart, its delicate frame dusted with frost, a symbol of life enduring through loss. The manor, once a crucible of tragedy, now hummed with quiet purpose. Maids polished oak banisters with renewed vigor, footmen stoked fires with care, and villagers passed through the gates, no longer whispering of poison, but speaking of harvests and hope. The shadow of Eleanor Hargrove's death, though never forgotten, had softened, like a wound healed into a scar, leaving Crimson Orchard ready to write a new chapter. Sir Reginald Hargrove, his grief tempered by time, had made a bold decision: to sell the estate. "It's time," he confided to a neighbor during a rare outing to the village. "Eleanor's memory lives here, but I must let go." His portly frame, once slumped with sorrow, now carried a quiet dignity, his mustache steady as he spoke of plans to retire to a modest cottage by the sea. The manor, he decided, would pass to a young family, a distant cousin with children whose laughter might banish the last echoes of tragedy. The decision, though Hargrove, now a pillar of the estate, had overseen the transition with grace. Her role as steward had blossomed, her once sharp demeanor softened by the responsibility of honoring Eleanor's legacy. She organized the final harvest festival, where villagers filled baskets with apples and toasted Eleanor's grace with homemade cider. "The manor's not mine to keep," she told Miss Marple during a brief visit, her spectacles glinting with resolve. "But I've ensured its heart endures." Miss Marple, observing her quiet pride, saw a woman who had found purpose in loss. "You've done well, Miss Hargrove," she said, her voice warm. "Eleanor would be grateful." Victor Langford's journey, far from Kent's rolling hills, had taken him to South Africa's sun-drenched vineyards. A second letter, forwarded by Sir Reginald, arrived with news of his new life. "The vines are kind," he wrote, his elegant script tinged with hope. "They remind me that growth follows even the darkest winters." His silence about Eleanor's pregnancy, A secret that had weighed heavily during the investigation was now a chapter closed, his love for her a memory he carried without bitterness. Miss Marple, reading by her fire, smiled faintly. "He's found his peace," she said, her needles pausing. "The heart mends, given space to grow." Dr. Elias Thorne, his London practice thriving, had fully abandoned his fascination with poisons. A colleague's note, shared with Miss Marple, described his new focus on pediatric care, a nod to his sister's memory. "I've learned to heal, not harm," he wrote in a brief message to the manor, his scholarly tone softened by humility. His carelessness, once a shadow over the case, was now a lesson etched in his work. Miss Marple, recalling his nervous fingers, nodded. "Redemption is a quiet thing," she murmured, "but it speaks loudly." Harold Fitch, the gardener, remained at Crimson Orchard until the sale, tending the orchards with a devotion that outlasted suspicion. The poisoned apple, a cruel red herring, was forgotten, replaced by the pride of a bumper harvest. "Trees don't hold. Tree bears fruit in time," she said, her eyes twinkling. Lydia Beaumont's trial, reported in London's papers, had concluded with a guilty verdict. Her sentence, severe but just, marked the final chapter of her betrayal. Sir Reginald, reading the news, had wept, not for Lydia, but for the friend Eleanor had lost. "She was part of our family," he said, his voice heavy. Miss Marple, reflecting on Lydia's jealousy, saw a cautionary tale. "Love twisted by envy is a poison of its own," she murmured, her needles clicking. The manor staff, once wary of Lydia's flair, now spoke of her with pity, a figure undone by her own heart. The locked room mystery, its mechanics laid bare by Miss Marple's deductions, had become a local legend, recounted in village pubs with a mix of awe and sadness. The duplicate key, the tampered vial, the slow poison, all pieces of a puzzle now solved, their red herrings dispelled. The orchard's hidden tunnel, the muddy footprint, the blackmail note, each had played its part. But the truth, as Miss Marple knew, lay in the human heart. "It's always the little things," she said, her voice soft as she folded Amelia's letter. "The glances, the silences, the choices." As the manor prepared for its new owners, the orchard stood ready to bloom anew. The sale, finalized in November, brought a young family, a couple with 2 children, their laughter already echoing through the halls. Sir Reginald, visiting one last time, stood by Eleanor's grace, his eyes misty but calm. "This is her legacy," he said to Amelia, who nodded, her hand resting on the sapling's trunk. The villagers, invited to a farewell gathering, toasted the Hargroves, their glasses raised to a future bright with promise. Miss Marple, in St. Mary Mead, closed her knitting bag, her thoughts lingering on Crimson Orchard. The case, with its layers of love and loss, was a mirror to her village intrigues, human nature unchanging, whether in a manor or a cottage. "Life is like an orchard," she said to Pearl, her cat blinking lazily. "It weathers storms, but always blooms again." As she prepared for her